Hello, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining me. I'm Amy Davison from Gallery 1, and we are going to be making the Art2GO penguin greeting card. Let's look at what our materials are that came in our bag. So you should have 2 blank greeting cards with envelopes. In this project, I'm going to show you one style of how to do a penguin. You can either make that same style again and again and send them out to your friends and family, or you can use the other one to look up on the computer a different picture of a penguin or other animal and paint another picture. You are going to have a paper towel. You'll have a pencil and a packet of paintbrushes with different shapes and sizes, a watercolor palette. What you will need to supply for yourself is a glass with water for rinsing your brushes. Mine is a yogurt container. It's the perfect size for this little project. I also, for myself, have printed out a penguin picture to look at. You guys can look at the pamphlet that came in your kit and see the penguin that I did already for the kit, or you can look up a different style. This particular penguin is called an emperor penguin. So what I'm going to do to start out is I'm going to take my envelope that I want to keep safe and clean, and I'm going to set that aside somewhere where I won't accidentally get paint on it or get it wet. My next step, because I like to paint my watercolors fairly vivid, not everyone does, but I like mine to be kind of bold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my water, I'm going to dip my finger in here, and I'm going to add 2 or 3 drops of water here. Oops, I got an extra one in my purple. I'm going to go through here, or I guess that was blue that I added extra drop to. And this is just going to start softening it so that by the time we are done drawing, our paint will be nice and ready and prepped for us. I'm going to set this off to the side, move my water, and we will start our penguin drawing. Now we have to think about the proportions of a penguin. And an emperor penguin especially has a very long body, a small head, and where his feet will be. If you're doing a baby penguin, he's going to be a lot more smushed and short, okay? So decide where on your paper you would like to place your penguin. Make sure that your card is orientated to where when you open it, it opens the right direction. If you want, you could even turn it sideways and do a whole colony of penguins, which would be super fun. For this one, I'm going to do the regular vertical format on my card. So I'm going to start my penguin's head way up here and just ever so slightly to the right versus the left, because I need space to come down here and curve the direction of my penguin's tail. I'm hoping my penguin's tail ends about here. And we'll go. While you're sketching this out, use a very, very light touch. And by that, I mean, don't like dig it in and make a dark line. You want it to be a very light sketch. And that way, if you have any mistakes, you can erase them without having a little divot in your paper. I, however, am going to draw a little bit darker than I want you to, simply so you can see it over my camera. So what you can see me doing, back off a little bit and do it a little bit lighter. So right here, we're going to make the arch and start to curve down for our penguin. That's the top of his head. We're going to kind of smooth and go long out for a beak, because emperor penguins have a fairly long beak for catching all those big fish, right? So there's our penguin's beak. Hope that you guys can see that on the video. I do think it might be a little bit hard to see it. You can see there's a penguin beak there. We're going to come all the way down his back. They kind of have like a slight hunched shoulders. And then it curves back in. And it comes all the way down to a penguin point. And once again, I am drawing my lines way darker than I want you to, just so that you can see it on the recording. So we have the front part or the back part of our penguin. Now we have to do his front side. I'm going to kind of elongate this out. And I'm going to make a nice smooth line like this. And then I'm going to kind of curve it in here, you can see, and I'm stopping. Because the penguin has so much white on his belly that where his next leg comes from, you don't want to necessarily have a sharp line right here. Ideally, this line along the front of his belly right here would be a lot lighter so that it barely shows up as a shadow when we get further along. We're going to next draw our lovely emperor penguins. You know what? I think I need to make him a little chubbier. I think this penguin hasn't had enough cookies this holiday. Oh no! This isn't good. Let me see if I have a better eraser. Let's see if this one will work. And this, kids, is why I say to not push hard. Okay, plan B. I'm going to swap cards. Now, if I was in the gallery or working on my own card and not just on a recording, I would work harder to fix that. And I'll go back and fix that one later. But right now, for the sake of time, let me just redraw my penguin's head. Beak. Oh, look, this time I added an extra line in his beak. You can add that extra line this time if you want. His little hunched back. And a penguin tail. Now I'm going to add his belly. This time I'm going to come out a little wider so he's a little chubbier. Yeah, that looks better. And like I said, don't worry, I'm not going to waste that card. I will make that beautiful later. And here we're going to make a little bit of the upper part of the penguin's wing. It does kind of curve up here for what we can see. And then it's going to come down in kind of like the longer part of your arm. And we have a little bit of the front of his wing and a nice soft curve. And it's ever so slightly rounded at the bottom of our penguin's wing. I hope you guys can see. Yep, yeah, I can. Over here, we need to put another wing. Right there. Now our penguin needs some feet. Let's start with the foot that's closest to us. I'm going to add this little line kind of right here, and the one that comes up here where his belly curves by it. And then we're going to take a line right here. And next we have to do the penguin's feet. And an emperor penguin has very leathery looking feet and skin. So we're going to kind of draw these big, thick toes on our bird. And they kind of curve a little bit. Penguins have some sharp talons at the ends, not for like the talons of an eagle or a hawk or a falcon, but they do have sharp talons at the ends of their toes for gripping the ice as they waddle along. So I'm going to draw some kind of triangle toes here. I'm going kind of fast just for the sake of the project. If you're doing this at home, you can take a lot longer to make those look perfect. And then when we do our painting, we'll paint the kind of leathery wrinkles in on our penguin's feet. The next step is to go through and draw a light hint of a line where we want to place our colors. So an emperor's penguin's eyeball is a little bit lower and to the side of his head, because remember, even though these penguins are fairly big, they are an animal that others prey on. They are a prey animal. We're going to do this little loopy here because their underside of their beak is a little bit of a like pinky red color. I'm going to take a slight curve up here to show the roundness of our penguin's belly, or his neck rather. And then you come up here with this beautiful patch of orange and yellow with a hint of red that comes up around and lets us know that it's an emperor penguin. And then it comes around here for his little kind of tuxedo jacket shape. And then you can see that I came to the point on the wing about, a third. It's almost exactly a third right here is where I stopped my black line. I'm going to pick up my pencil because all of this is going to be that white of its belly. And then over here, we're going to do just a little bit of a squiggle line right here where it also has his white legs. So it's like his penguin tuxedo is white with white legs and just a black jacket. On this wing over here, if you wanted to, you could kind of draw a section out because part of his wing is going to be white. I think on that one, I'll just show you how when I paint. And then one more step that I'm going to suggest is just super, super faintly drawing a little hint right back here of where you think your horizon line is going to be behind your penguin when we go in and add some snow in the sky. Okay, so now comes the fun part of a watercolor painting, the actual painting. I am going to take, in my kit, in your kit, you should have a variety of paintbrushes. And two of them are going to be these ones that have a slightly rounded tip. They're flat from this side, but rounded at the top. That is what we are going to use for this step. I'm going to use, I think, the smaller one there. Dip your paintbrush in your water and tap it. Make sure that you don't have a huge blob of paint right there. And you're just going to gently, because remember, we softened our black paint. So by just dipping it, I already have a lot of paint loaded on my paintbrush. And we're going to be able to spread this around most of our penguin's face. Now, normally a penguin's eye is black. I'm going to choose to make my penguin's eye purple at the end, at the very end, or towards the end, just so that it shows up a little in my painting and isn't completely covered in. So I'm going to use this curve of my paintbrush to fit the curve of the penguin's head. I'm going to gently drag a little bit of that paint down its beak. And I'm going to go around, leaving a spot for our bright orange and yellow. And because we're doing this painting as a wet on dry, the paper is still dry, I didn't have you tape it down. If you tape it down, you could tape it to something like a clipboard so that you can still rotate it and move it. By taping it, it means it won't wrinkle as much if you put a lot of water on your paper. And by putting the water on your paper, it makes the fibers shift and shrink and get tight. And sometimes it makes your paper a little wiggly and wavy looking when it dries. This one, unless you load it with a ton of water, I think will be okay. If it does look less than flat for you, when you're done, let it dry to where it's cool to touch and not sopping wet, and then stick it under something heavy like a cookbook or a phone book, if you guys happen to have a phone book or dictionary, something heavy. Anyways, let's pick back up here. I'm going to rotate my card just a little bit because I did not tape it down. I have that ability to go ahead and change the direction of my card to keep my paintbrush angle the most comfortable for me. I'm going to draw a big line all the way down. I'm going to dip it back in for as much paint as I need as I go along. And see that I'm kind of pushing the paint to where it's a little bit thicker on its back than it is on the middle part of its body, just so I have a bolder outline on my penguin. If you wanted, you could do that in reverse, since often a penguin has the light shining off their oily feathers. But for an illustration, I like to have that darker line on the outside. I'm going to come up here and smooth out this little shape. While you're working with the black, oh no, look, I kind of covered in his eye. That's okay, he's just going to have some more eye. That's the nice part about the black paint, is that it covers up your pencil marks. And if you have to move your line a little bit while you're painting, that's okay. It might not look exactly like you're drawing. I'm going to dip for a little more paint and come over here. And you can see that now my paint, for what I have in my little paint well, is getting a lot thicker. And so I'm going to need to start adding a dot of water from my water cup as I go. I'm going to take a nice smooth stroke all the way up, down, and around, and then fill in my penguin's wings. And once again, you can kind of see where I have that one section where I left it a little bit darker. And we can go back in. Watercolor is great for kind of layering and blending. Dip just a little bit of water on my brush, and then pick up a little more of my black paint. And this is what's nice about this curved brush. Look, my penguin has a slight curve instead of sharp point here. And I'm able to fit that curve of the brush right in here. I'm going to smooth this out a little bit by adding just a little bit of friction. It's going to help pick up some of that paint that looked a little thicker there. You don't want it quite as thick right in that spot. I'm going to pick up a little more thick pigment and darken my penguin's back so that his wing stands out a little bit by being just a shade lighter than his back is. And I'm going to come around here and just kind of touch up his wing just a little bit, but I'm going to add a little water. And re-smooth my line out. So I think I kind of got it a little bit rough. Where else on our penguin is black? Well, his other wing needs a little bit, so I'm going to dip a little fresh water and a little black pigment. I'm going to come down here and just touch along the bottom portion of its wing. I was going to say flipper because I swim with them. I'm going to use my paper towel at this point to blot a little water off. I don't like how wet it was at that moment. And I'm just going to add a very faint line right up here. Maybe a tiny bit more black on the tip. I did not add extra water that time. I was pulling a more concentrated pigment up. Now I'm going to, I need to do my penguin's feet. I'm done with this paintbrush for the moment. So I'm going to set it in my water cup. We don't want to leave a paintbrush in a water cup for very long because it will soften the glue that holds our the hairs into your brush, and it can mush your end of your brush and make it a funny shape. But for now, This project isn't super long, so I'm going to set it down here. I'm going to look through my assortment of paintbrushes and say, which one would be good for the size of my penguin's toes? This one looks fantastic. It says number 2. It doesn't have to be the number 2, but if that helps you figure out which size I'm using, that's good. I'm going to dip in here, and I'm going to color in my penguin's toes and his little toenails. I need a little more water. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and try and leave mine to where you can see some of the brush stroke of where each toe is. If that doesn't work though, we'll come back in with a little bit of white and add some wrinkles on top of it, okay? I love to watercolor. I find it so relaxing. So you can see some variation in the blacks to kind of give an idea of where his feet. Okay, so our next step, we're gonna wiggle that paintbrush around in the water. Let that start getting cleared up. We're gonna go back to our smaller round brush. This time we're gonna be painting some yellow, orange, and red. Yellow, orange, and red are so much lighter than black that you're gonna wanna make sure your brush is nice and clean and doesn't have any residual black pigment in its brushes, in the bristles. So I have it's a little bit stained, but when I wipe it on my paper towel, I don't see black coming through. So that's a good sign. I'm gonna re-wet it. And if your water gets super dark and murky because you've put a really loaded paintbrush in it, you guys could always go and empty this out for fresh water, or maybe even have 2 cups as you paint. If I'm doing a large painting, I will sometimes have a rinsing one and a cleaner one, or maybe rather a washing one and a rinsing one. Here we go, picking up some yellow pigment on our slightly round brush. You can see about how much I have on there. I'm going to fit it in the curve right here. And I'm being very careful to not get into my black. Now, if your black was super wet, you might see it start bleeding into each other. Mine was fairly dry because of my lights that I have here. You might need to take a slight pause between the 2 portions though, depending on the temperature in your room and how much water you had in your paint. I'm going to come down here just a little ways, and then I'm going to stop, because that's about all the brightness that our emperor penguin has on him. I'm going to rinse my brush out, dab it just a little, and then using my mostly clean brush, I am going to kind of feather in the color on our penguin's belly. And you can see that now I softened that line so much that it looks much more like a real penguin. They don't have a real crisp line on the yellow like they do the black dividing the yellow. Emperor penguins don't have just yellow. They have a hint of orange and red too. So I'm going to load a little bit of orange on my brush and add some right here and just to the top right here of his, right at his neck before it goes down. So there's my little bit of orange. I'm going to rinse my brush off, dab it, and pick up a little bit of red. Now, if I was working in a different color palette where I had squirted paint, I might not rinse my brush between my orange and my red, because I would have been okay with there being a little bit on my paintbrush still. But I like to keep these kinds of palettes clean between brush strokes and between color changes, so that when I do another painting, that maybe the orange and red are not together in the same mix, I don't want to make this too muddy and mixed up. So I rinsed between. Here we're just going to add a little bit of red, a little more red right here. Feel like I'm picking up, so I'm going to stop right there for a minute, and we might come back and add a little bit of red later when that has had a chance to dry. We're just going to add a hint of red on top of that orange at the top. Now the picture of one I have is under beak is kind of red with a little bit of orange. So I didn't put my orange in yet. I'm going to put the red there, rinse my brush, dab it out. Oops, there's still red. There we go. And pick up a little bit of orange to blend in there. And like I said, if I was working on a palette with like squirtable watercolors that come in a tube or a bottle, I wouldn't worry about rinsing my brush. And I'm going to feather that out with a clean but wet brush. Smooth those lines out. Now that's looking pretty good. That looks like a recognizable penguin. But we have a few things we still need to do. We need to make some of the shadows down here. There's no shadows, it's just the plain paper, which is fine. But I would like to show you guys how to move a few steps further. What we're going to do is take a brush, and we're going to pick up a fair amount of white on this brush. We're going to use our lid like a palette. And we're going to smear as much of that in a little tiny section over here. I don't know if you guys can see it, the light. I put some paint over here, okay, of my white. I'm going to kind of smush it off of my brush, wash my brush out, because I don't want to put white in my black, but we're going to be making gray. So white and black make gray. Your black is going to have a lot more pigment in it than your white. So all you need to do is get the teensiest bit. See that little teeny tiny dot? That's all the black I need on there. And I'm going to mix that in. Oh, maybe I needed a hair more. I'm going to take this other brush so I don't have to re-rinse. I'm going to take up just a hair more black. Didn't get any on there. So just a tiny more black right here, okay? And then mix that in. We're not looking for a dark gray. We're just looking for something that's going to be a little bit of color different than the watercolor paper that we're using. So you can see I have a little bit of a grayish color on here. I'm going to look over at my penguin picture and go, where are the shadows? I think that it'll be easiest for us learning to paint to turn our paper upside down if you are not taped in place. Use the curve of this brush along the curve of your line and simply add a little bit of a shadow here under his belly, a little bit of a shadow here. Don't go too crazy and dark because we still want to know that our penguin is white. We're just adding the ideas that there's shadow under his belly, on each side of his legs. And if you, oh, don't forget his little wing over here. It needs some shadow or some shading too. Just a little bit. If you feel like one of your lines got too dark, rinse your brush out in your water cup. Wipe it off. Yep, I have no more pigment on here. I'm checking for pigment as I wipe my brush. I'm going to now pick up fresh water. And I am going to kind of pull up some of the paint, wiping it on my paper towel between strokes. And you can see that I lightened my gray shadow a bit. Don't rub too much like this real frantically, or you will maybe peel up your paper, especially if you are using a lesser quality. And we don't want to cause these little pills like your sweater gets. Your paper can do the same thing. I'm going to look in my paintbrushes. For the tiniest paintbrush I have, I'm going to dampen my bristles. and pick up a good bead of purple paint. Purple is the one right here by your white. And I'm gonna put in my penguin's eye very carefully and make it still very round, okay? We're gonna let that continue to dry as we do our background, and then we can come back in and add a dot for the highlight in the eyeball. So let your purple dry, don't touch it. Mine at least is mine's beaded up on the surface. I don't know if you guys can tell that, but I got a lot of water and paint in that drop. If my black was not dry, my purple might kind of go and spread out like tie-dye does. My black is fairly dry, so it's not happening. You can also take a hair dryer and gently dry your watercolor paintings as you're going if you need to speed up your process. I don't normally do that, but some people do. So for the water, I'm using the big flat brush in your kit, which was a 5/8 brush. It's very wet, a lot of water on my brush this time with a little bit of blue. I'm going to come in and I'm going to put a little line here and a little line here. Your line does not have to be perfectly straight. You could curve it up like there's a snowbank or a glacier behind your penguin, or that your penguin is standing on. But I'm going to go like this, and I'm just going to bring down a little bit of my blue right here. And I feel like my blue is a little intense and bright. So I'm going to try and kind of work it a little bit lighter. It probably doesn't look as bright on the camera screen, which is good. And you can see I'm keeping my paintbrush this direction. My paintbrush is now getting pretty dry because I just want it to be very suggestive of something without a lot of detail. I'm going to dampen it just a little with just water. I didn't dip it in more blue because I'm just pulling from that first bit of blue to bring it down as a suggestion. If you wanted, you could wash your brush out really well. Not all watercolor palettes come with white. Ours did. If you wanted to dip it in there, you could take a little bit of white and mix it in. And this will change the blue just a little bit. Even from having it, it'll add a little bit of opacity to it that normally isn't in your watercolor paint. Again, right there, you saw me dip my brush. I pulled up a little bit of my color. And then I'm going to add just a hint of blue, very, very little, right along the bottom under my penguin so that he looks like he has a shadow. He's standing on something, not just floating in the air. And then I'm going to take my brush. There's a little patch here of white that's bright. I like that. I could have left some over here. That would have been lovely too. I'm going to turn my card over because it's not down and I can. I'm going to use my lid right here to see how much paint I have on my brush. I don't want much there. I'm going to add a little more water and very, very lightly. I'm going to add, without going over my blue for my horizon, I'm going to add a very wet, light layer. Not very wet. I guess it's pretty dry, but I'm going to add mostly just water with the barest hint of paint to be my sky. Just enough so that we know it's not a blank white card behind our wonderful emperor penguin. Okay. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm liking this penguin. But I do think that I need to touch up the red a little bit where it was starting to not stick in the paper earlier. I'm going to go in and just add another thin layer there. I'm going to add a thin bit of orange to the bottom of the beak where it's a little splotchy. And I believe my purple is dry enough or close to it. Those of you at home might want to give it a little more time to dry between this step. But if you look at a photo of a penguin or you see a real penguin in real life, there is often that little bit of a dot that signifies where the light is reflecting. So we're just going to add a little, oh yeah, mine was a little bit wet still. My dot became a little bigger than I wanted. I'm going to take a little ball of paper here and blot that. I'm going to try and add a more distinct dot for you. I would make this super tiny if I was in person. I made it a little bigger just so you guys can see it, hopefully on the camera. If you don't like the way that the white is, if you got it a little too big, you could let this dry, blow on it, whatever, use a blow dryer, and use a super light touch to add just a little bit of black to that to fill it in. And while I'm at it, my beak got a little crooked. I'm just going to outline it carefully on the bottom, straighten my edge. There we go. And that, my friends, is, oh, wait, I forgot a step. I forgot to make his feet look leathery. Because our palette came with white, we can go back in and add some little like highlights that are the light reflecting off the wrinkles in our penguin's toes. So I'm just going to add little tiny lines around his ankles and over his toes. This might be a little bit hard to see over the camera, so I'm going to maybe make them a little blotchier and brighter so you can see them. Make these really delicate though in real life and not quite as thick as I just did. And there you go. That is your penguin watercolor painting. We are all done with it. So thank you guys very much for joining me today in making our watercolor penguin card, greeting card. It's all ready for you to open up and write a message. Well, let it dry first. And then you can write a message, address your envelope, and send it to somebody to cheer their day up. With the warmest wishings of penguins in the cold, right? Thank you so much for joining me. I am Amy Davison from Gallery 1, and this was an Art2GO project.